are listening to the Up and Under podcast, starting in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Up and Under podcast. I'm your host, Hani. Joining me, not remotely, it's Zeeshan.
Hey, not remotely, finally. What's up, guys?
Yeah, we're back doing the podcast in person. We do have a new setup going on.
Yo.
As you can see, it's a bit of a work in progress. Little new, space is a little new, so. But it's good. It means more good things to come.
Yep, for sure. It means better quality, all that. Just better. Having a better setup makes a huge difference.
Absolutely.
That's for sure.
So that's why I want to apologize if there's any echoes or anything, just because, again, a bit of an empty space right now, but we're trying to fill it up slowly but surely. But speaking of new things, we're in the playoffs, man.
Yeah, we are.
We're at the point in the time where shit gets real. You gotta play for it all. You gotta play for that championship, that Larry O'Brien trophy, and yeah, man.
That's the best time of year, right?
It's also very stress-free for us.
Yeah, for the first time, as you guys might have heard in the last couple of episodes, for me at least, this is the most stress-free playoffs I've had in a while.
Yeah.
Since our Raptors are not in the playoffs, and hopefully we're gonna get that number one pick.
Fade for Kate.
Facts.
We're already in there. But since we're now past the play-in tournament, we want to start doing our predictions for the playoffs. And in this episode, we're going to start off with our Eastern Conference Round 1 playoff predictions. So basically, we're going to break down each series because they're now official and give you guys our prediction. We talk about the series a little bit and what we think is going to happen. And the Eastern Conference is shaping up to be a pretty interesting first round. Starting us off with the first matchup, we have the first seeded Philadelphia 76ers taking on the 8th seeded Washington Wizards. Now the Wizards obviously lost the first game of the play-in, but won the second game in order to make it as the 8th seed. They were already the 8th seed going into the play-in, but
we'll talk about the play-in and what we think about it a little later.
Yeah, but again, Washington secured their spot in the playoffs as the 8th seed. Now the Philadelphia 76ers are coming into the playoffs with the 13th best offense in the league, the second best defense in the league. Meanwhile, the Wizards are coming in with the 17th best offense, the 19th best defense in the league. And Philly, they've been pretty dominant all season, and they've had the number one seed for most of the year. You know, they've been doing it on both ends of the floor. They arguably have the best player in the series in Joel Embiid. Like, Joel Embiid been playing like an MVP candidate this year. Spoiler alert, check out our episode last week where we talked about the awards prediction. We talked a little bit about Joel Embiid in there as well.
We're pretty solid on our awards.
We were pretty solid on that. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so already. But basically, Washington doesn't have any player or center to take on Joel Embiid. Like, I think this is the first matchup that Joel Embiid's had in his playoff career where there's nobody opposing him to stop him. Like, obviously, Washington has Daniel Gafford.
Who's been great.
Who's been pretty good for them. But again...
And the GOAT Rock and Lopez.
Bro, the
best hook shot player in the league.
Bro,
I think statistically the best hook shot player in the league. I'm not even joking.
Still the best three-point celebration in the league.
Also the best mascot killer in the league.
Absolutely.
Mascot bully.
Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, the Wizards, they have some decent centers. Oh, and they have Alex Len as well. But again, they have a decent center and Alex Len. But none of them are capable of taking on a player like Joel Embiid. And Joel is going to be able to dominate and be that player that we've seen in the regular season. Where he basically became an MVP candidate this year. Now, Washington does have Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook, and they've been playing very well as of recently. Especially Beal and Westbrook together have just been fantastic, just being the key contributors to leading the Wizards to the playoffs, being where they were to start the year. But again, Philly has Ben Simmons. They have arguably one of the best perimeter, or if not the best perimeter defender in the league. So no matter what Washington tries to do, one of those two guys are going to be taken out. Because again, best perimeter defender in the league, taking on one of the best offensive players in the league, it's more likely than the defense is going to win. And again, it will, it does hurt the Wizards as far as taking out one of those two players, Beal and Westbrook. It hurts them as far as winning this series. They're actually making it competitive. I mean, Washington had a nice run. They made it as far as they did. But again, I didn't even mention the Philly not only has Simmons and Embiid, they have Tobias Harris, they have Seth Curry, they have all these talented players just coming off the roster. Not to mention they have Doc Rivers versus Scott Brooks.
Exactly.
Like I think that already speaks for itself. Despite Doc Rivers' history and his trickiness with his playoff success, especially in Game 7s.
Yeah.
There's no denying Doc Rivers is a championship level coach. He's done it. He's a veteran coach. He knows how to win in the playoffs. So, which is why I think our prediction for this one is it's probably the easiest one. We're predicting this week.
Yeah, man. One name you didn't even mention, who I think gets a lot of flack, but excluding what he did offensively in the last 2 playoffs, his defense remains elite and has continued this season, and especially when he doesn't have to guard the other best perimeter player. I'm talking about Danny Green. Right? You mentioned Ben Simmons locking up one of either Westbrook or Bradley Beal. And whoever he locks up, Danny Green will take the other guy. And so
Danny gets a lot of heat, but again, Danny's a playoff performer, man. He shows up in the playoff, and he's still a good defensive player.
Exactly.
You can't take that away.
And even if he doesn't do anything offensively, Philly doesn't need to do much offensively, right? They're going to get whatever they want. The Washington Wizards, though their defense has improved a lot over the past 2 months or so, they're still, we know what they are defensively, right? It doesn't matter that they got this much better. If you're like garbage, 28th ranked defensively in the beginning of the year, that doesn't completely get erased by the end of the season, right? So Philly doesn't have to be spectacular offensively. They can just be okay offensively against a team like the Wizards who have not great defense, especially when you have, if you look at their lineup, Westbrook, a subpar defender, right? Bradley Beal, another non-great defender. Davis Bertans, a terrible defender, right? So when you're factoring that in, Philly does not have to be great on the offensive end in order to win the series. And then when we flip it over to the defensive end, Philly is one of the best defending teams in the league. And especially when you factor in the fact that, Russell Westbrook has had his playoff issues, primarily because of the fact that teams just scheme they come up with a scheme to let Russell Westbrook shoot the ball from the outside. And Westbrook has never been able to get over the hump because he's never been able to address that issue in his game. And that has continued into this season where he's been a subpar shooter again. That's what also lost him that game against Indiana, right? So Philly, on one end, does not have to play great. And on the other end, I think has the tools to not even have to play, to their utmost potential, which is on the defensive end. They can simply be solid on that end to what their talent level is. And I think they will easily win the series. I'm sorry. Like Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal have been great, no doubt. But against a team like the Philadelphia 76ers, and you mentioned it, defense wins playoff games. If you can't play defense, spoiler alert, I'm going to talk about this later on in another series. If you can't play defense, you're severely limiting your chance in the NBA playoffs. And then, as you said, one final point. Scott Brooks versus Doc Rivers. We've had our criticisms of both, but Scott Brooks, man, I'm not going to repeat it, but bro, I don't know how this guy has a job, honestly.
Bro, man, he got his team to the play-in, man. His team was the garbage 11th seed, and somehow he ended up in the playoffs, and now I think his job is pretty much safe at this point.
Well, at least for, I think, probably next season.
Yeah.
But, our prediction, I think this is the easiest prediction that we had. Yeah, that we had for this Eastern Conference playoffs. Bust out the brooms, right? Philly, I think we're predicting a sweep versus the Washington Wizards. Yeah. Moving on to the 2 versus 7 matchup, we have the Brooklyn Nets as the 2nd seed versus the Boston Celtics as the 7th seed. Now, the Brooklyn Nets are obviously first in offensive ranking. No surprise there. But however, they are 22nd in defensive rating. Boston, meanwhile, is 10th in offensive rating and 14th in defensive rating. Now, when it comes to the matchup of these two teams, obviously Boston, I think, they are better than what their record suggests. We all know that. But the Brooklyn Nets in this series might have the 3 best players in the series. Now, Jason Tatum, I think you could argue between, for example, him versus Kyrie Irving. But there is no argument with him versus James Harden or Kevin Durant. Maybe later on in his career, if Boston fans get what they want. But at this stage in their respective careers right now, James Harden and Kevin Durant are vastly superior players compared to a guy like Jason Tatum. So the Brooklyn Nets already have the talent advantage. Offensively, they're going to be able to get whatever they want. They already have arguably, the best offense in NBA history, arguably, right? They have probably the most talented offensive set of stars in NBA history. And given Boston's lack of focus and defensive effort and just overall, play on the defensive end of the ball, it'll be very hard pressed for Boston to be able to do anything against this Brooklyn offense, especially given the fact, like I said, again, Boston has been uncharacteristically bad on that end of the ball this year. Brad Stevens will try to make it tough. However, with guys like Evan Fournier and Kemba Walker in the lineup, Brooklyn can easily attack those guys in mismatches. And, they don't even need mismatches. Whoever they're guarding is already a mismatch for those guys. Those guys are subpar defenders, right? And Brooklyn already had an offensive advantage. If you're going to be able to give them weak links to attack, Brooklyn's not going to, make any mistakes on the offensive end. However, for Brooklyn, they won't be able to completely stop the Boston Celtics, right? The Boston Celtics might give them some issues given their lack of defense. However, as we've seen, when Brooklyn focuses on the defensive end of the ball, Brooklyn can play much better on that end of the ball, especially when we're talking about scouting reports in the middle of games. So Boston could pose some problems for the Brooklyn Nets on the defensive end. However, one key thing is that the Boston Celtics don't have Jaylen Brown anymore. And, we're talking about the 10th best offensive rating in basketball for the Boston Celtics. Much of that can be attributed to the growth and success of Jaylen Brown, which they do not have this series.
Yeah, man, I think it's tough, man. It's tough to see Boston doing well in this series just because, again, you're talking about a juggernaut Brooklyn Nets team that's pretty much constructed to make the NBA Finals at the bare minimum. And anything other than not available. Let's just keep
Bro, if they don't win a championship, it's failure.
It's a failure. But that being said, there's no denying they have that much talent. Like, you have Kevin Durant, James Harden, Kyrie Irving. Not to mention, you didn't mention a guy like Blake Griffin who's on that team.
Joe Harris.
I mean, a guy like Mike Evans is just
Mike James.
Mike
James was great.
Mike James coming in and
he was a great pick.
See, I don't know who he is, if he's still dropping buckets. Like, it's crazy how much talent that Brooklyn team has, and Boston's been a good team. Despite our hatred for them, we have to respect what Jason Tatum been able to do. Like, the guy dropped 50 in the playing game to get Boston at the 7th seed. So this man can play. And also, Kemba's been turning it around as of late. But again, you're going back to you've lost one of your best defenders in Jaylen Brown. So he's one of your best two-way players in Jaylen Brown. You're replacing him with pretty much negative defenders in Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier. Although, again, they can produce on the offensive end. But defensively, you're losing out on that one against an offensive juggernaut. And then on top of that, like, you're basically asking Jason Tatum to carry this team. Because, again, there's not really much else on this Boston team besides really him and Kemba,
Yeah.
Like, I don't see how Boston will get to, will be able to do this, man. And then for Brooklyn, I mean, like, you have to win this, man.
Exactly.
Like, I can see Boston winning one. Maybe Tatum gets hot. But yeah, this is a tough one, man.
Yeah, and that brings us to my final point, which is, Boston with Brad Stevens, given his history of producing the most out of his players and getting the most out of his players, they are good enough with Brad Stevens, Jason Tatum, and if Kemba Walker is able to replicate some of his Charlotte Hornets success, they are good enough, I think, to take one game, especially if they're in Boston. However, Brooklyn, man, it's just, what's the line for Thanos? I'm inevitable.
Yeah.
I'm inevitable. Brooklyn is just too stacked, man. And especially with Boston not having Jaylen Brown there, I think we're going to give Brooklyn a gentleman's sweep. And the Brooklyn Nets, we are predicting, will win the series 4-1.
Yeah, I gotta agree with that one, man. Like, it's so hard. Like, it must suck to be a Boston fan right now, just because it's like, your team is hurt. B, you're in the playoffs, so you want to be happy, but C, you're playing Brooklyn, so you're probably going to get slapped. And then D, you lost out on a good draft pick.
Exactly.
So
Boston fans didn't want to end up tanking after Jaylen Brown got hurt, but I think it was too late.
I enjoy the misery of Boston fans, but this is a little while, man. But so yeah, Brooklyn 4-1, gentleman's sweep for the Brooklyn Nets in the first round. Moving on to the third series in the Eastern Conference first round playoffs matchups. It is the Milwaukee Bucks taking on the Miami Heat. Milwaukee being the 3rd seed, Miami finishing as the 6th seed. Now, Milwaukee's obviously been a good team. They've had the 5th best offensive rating in the league, the 10th best defensive rating in the league. Meanwhile, Miami, 17th offensively, 7th defensively. And, this is a rematch from last year's semifinal where Milwaukee basically got slapped by Miami. 4-1 they lost. And it wasn't particularly close. Miami really exposed the Milwaukee Bucks' lackluster defense, over-reliance on Giannis. Not to mention, Miami got red hot from 3. And, again, due to
Jay Crowder shot 75%.
Yeah, and due to the Bucks' stale and stagnant defense, and also Mike Budenholzer's inability to adjust, Miami took care of them pretty easily. And it was pretty disappointing for Milwaukee considering they have championship aspirations. You have a guy who's a 2-time league MVP, a defensive player of the year. We've talked about this before. There is immense pressure on Giannis to now go after a championship. It's the same pressure that Kevin Durant went through after his MVP and his scoring titles and making it to the Western Conference Finals. It's the same pressure that Kevin Durant faced. Giannis decided to stay in town rather than go, hop on the bandwagon. So that's maybe a little bit of a good thing. Even though, again, you would have been nice when you were. I'm just saying. But again, this season, Milwaukee has done things to improve. They've improved their defense. They added Drew Holiday, PJ Tucker, and Mike Budenholzer has made it a point of emphasis to kind of tinker with the defense and make some adjustments. We've talked about it in previous episodes where he's introduced a lot more switching, and different kind of combinations to maybe see what he has on this team. Which again, some of it worked and some of it didn't, which is why the Bucks have the 10th best defense rather than what they've been a top 5 defense. So it should help them in the playoffs. And again, they're better on offense. They have a guy like Drew Holiday now. They're a little less reliant on Holiday because now on Giannis because now Drew Holiday can now take over a bit of that offensive load. This really Drew Holiday I think is the biggest key because he takes away pressure off of Chris Middleton. Chris Middleton has really struggled in the playoffs being that go-to number 2 option for Giannis.
Or even number 1.
Or even a number 1 option, which is, I don't necessarily blame him. That's just not his role. I think there are certain players that can be a number 1, number 2 option. And there's certain guys that are more better off suited to a number 3. And I think that's more so Chris Middleton's role. So having a guy like Drew Holiday there can split the responsibilities and put less pressure on him and get less defensive attention on Middleton, which means Middleton would potentially be better in that playoff series. And then not to mention, I think this Bucks team has the most depth in last year. You have guys like PJ Tucker, Bobby Portis, Dante DiVincenzo. They're players on this team. There are definitely some decent players on this Bucks team. But again, it's about will they be able to get it done. And again, they're going up against a Miami team that's still very dangerous. Despite their record, their record I think is irrelevant because again, they had to start off the year with COVID and injuries, and yet they still made it to the playoffs. So no discredit to Miami. They play really hard. They arguably have the best playoff performer in the series in Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler is a playoff performer. He will show up for the playoffs and he will dominate both ends of the floor. But I think the trouble for Miami this year will be on the offensive end. We mentioned a guy like Jay Crowder who shot about 70% in the series against the Bucks last year. Well, now they don't have Jay Crowder. They don't have Kelly Olynyk. They don't have Solomon Hill. They don't have these depth pieces they had last year. And now this year they have to rely upon their younger players. They need Bam to step up in particular. Bam's got to be that number 2 option for Jimmy, that Robin to Jimmy's back. You got to have Duncan Robinson, guys who can't get cold, Tyler Hero, Kendrick Nunn, These are the guys who Miami needs to step up and fill the void that the veterans that they left. And that would be the biggest key. I think defensively, I think Miami's fine. I think they've pretty much established they're still a good defensive team. But for me, it's the offense. And I think, pair that with the Bucks improvement on the defensive side of the ball, I think this is going to be a pretty interesting matchup. And one more point, coaching-wise, it's going to be a question. Will Coach Budenholzer finally adjust in the playoffs, or will he get outcoached by Coach Spoelstra again?
That might be the biggest factor.
That's the factor. As far as what my prediction is for the series, man, I think this is one of the toughest series to predict. I think out of the first round, I think it's going to go the distance. I think it's going to go 7 games. I think the Bucks will edge it up and take it in 7.
Yeah, I would agree with that simply because of the fact that I think the Bucks, talent-wise and roster-wise, are much better than they were last season compared compared to Miami, who I would say might be worse than last season. To your point, the biggest factor in the league is definitely Coach Budenholzer. Will he be able to keep up with Eric Spoelstra? Because we know what Eric Spoelstra is going to do. His game planning is elite. His schemes are elite. He's a very good coach, so it'll be up to Coach Budenholzer to see what he can do. I think you nailed it on the point about the young players will have to step up, right? Duncan Robinson. If you guys remember, he started off slow in the playoffs. He did turn it up. So, hopefully for Miami's sake, he'll be able to replicate what he did at the end of the playoffs rather than what he did in the beginning of the playoffs. And then Tyler Hero had a rough season, right? But hopefully he can turn it around in the playoffs as well. But the main thing that they're missing in terms of, having these guys step up is we're going to talk about him later on too, but this is when you miss a guy like Victor Oladipo, right? And Victor Oladipo not being there is a huge shot to Miami Heat, who traded for him.
Gave up some pieces.
They gave up some pieces for him, one of which was Kelly Olynyk, who's balling in Houston. But they gave up pieces for a guy like Victor Oladipo so that he could help them on both ends in the playoffs, which, he's not going to be there anymore. To your point about Bam Adebayo, we've said everything, he's amazing on defense, right? He is absolutely amazing on defense. The issue is on the offensive end. Now, he's a great passer for the big man spot. However, it's the fact that will he be able to put up those points? And they're going to need him to at least be able to get, 15 to 18 points a game, minimum. That's minimum. And we've seen when Jimmy Butler's not playing, Bam Adebayo, unfortunately, cannot get those points. He does everything else great, but those points are hard to come by for him. So he's going to have to step up against a very good team, a very good defensive team with a lot of length, like the Milwaukee Bucks. And then final point, I think Milwaukee their team got so much better with Drew Holiday there, not to mention the fact that you have Drew Holiday replacing Eric Bledsoe, Drew Bledsoe in the playoffs, right? That is, I think, one of the biggest things if you're a Milwaukee fan to be excited about. The fact that you don't have to see Eric Bledsoe break every single three and have 9 turnovers a game, and you actually have a capable and proven playoff player in Drew Holiday who can get it done on both sides of the ball. And for him to be able to, I think, split duties with Chris Middleton will be huge for the Milwaukee Bucks in the sense that Chris Middleton won't have to carry the offensive load, especially if Giannis struggles with his jumper, which the Miami Heat will force him to take. And they'll try to replicate the success from last year. And again, this is where the Coach Budenholzer factor comes in. Will he be able to work around Miami's schemes and get Giannis into good spots and get the rest of his guys into good spots? Or will he completely fail again, like last year? And as a result this year, will be fired according to numerous reports around the league.
Yeah. That's definitely been an interesting series, man.
It's going to be a fun series. You can say it's a toss-up. I wouldn't be surprised if Miami won in 6 or 7.
Dude,
I wouldn't be...
We went back and forth. We were just is it Miami? Because it's so hard to say, Miami's going to lose in the first round. That's hard to say. It's hard to predict, man.
It'll be, I wouldn't be surprised if the Heat won in 6 or Milwaukee won in 6 or if it went to 7 and either of them won. So I think that would be a very fun matchup to watch from this Eastern Conference edition of the NBA playoffs in the first round. Yeah. Moving on to our final playoff series of the Eastern Conference. Hani's ready for this one. I know you're going to watch every game excited. Absolutely excited. We're talking about the 4 versus 5 matchup. The New York Knicks were the 4th seed versus the Atlanta Hawks, who finished as the 5th seed in the Eastern Conference. Now, the New York Knicks finished with the 23rd ranked offense and the 4th ranked defense. Exactly, the Thibodeau specialty. Whereas Atlanta finished with the 8th best offense and the 21st best defense. Now, I think this is a very evenly matched series in the sense that both teams don't have a ton of playoff experience across their rosters. Both teams, we would say, are probably I would say at least on paper, the two of the worst teams, I guess, from this Eastern Conference playoff edition. Oh, yeah. Washington, I guess, would be, in that. But they're in the 8th spot, so they're going to get slapped. Yeah, exactly. But New York and Atlanta they're good teams, no doubt, but they're not as talented as any of the other teams, I would say, minus Washington, right? So I think there's a very evenly matched series in the sense of you look at both rosters, not a ton of experience. and just, not that upper echelon of the Eastern Conference. However, both teams are kind of polar opposites of each other. I just named the offensive and defensive rankings. New York is not great offensively and amazing defensively, whereas it's the opposite for Atlanta, where they're a good offensive team and terrible defensively. Now, New York has a good amount of capable scorers, I think, with RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, Derrick Rose, Alec Burks, who's been great for them, Emmanuel Quickly. So they do have some capable scorers, despite the fact that they did not have a great offense. They do have some talent in that regard, but especially when factoring in Atlanta's terrible defense. Now, I think they even finished better than I thought they would finish as with their defensive rating. However, again, similar to what I said about the Philadelphia 76ers versus the Washington Wizards, I don't think New York has to be amazing on the offensive end of the ball. They can be pretty solid, I think, against the lack of defense that Atlanta has. Now, Atlanta does have some good rim protection with Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu, but New York will for sure target Atlanta's perimeter defenders. For example, Trae Young, who they're going to target like crazy. We thought the Cleveland Cavaliers a couple years ago targeted Steph Curry like crazy in the playoffs or in the finals. New York's going to take it up to a whole nother level with Trae Young, just because of the fact that Trae Young is much smaller than even Steph Curry is. So they're going to target Atlanta's perimeter defenders. So what Atlanta will have to do is force New York towards paying help towards a guy like Clint Capella, who's been great for them, and Onyeka Okongwu. However, Atlanta is also much more talented offensively as well. And they're, in theory, capable of working around Tom Thibodeau and New York's defensive schemes just because of the talent that they have on the offensive side of the ball. You're talking about Trae Young, a guy that can shoot from inside half court. Bogdanovich has been great in the last couple of months for the Atlanta Hawks. Another guy like Danilo Gallinari, who's capable of going off for 30, 35 points. However, they're also smaller and I think less talented than the New York Knicks. And that fact, the size factor is real in the playoffs because of the fact that the playoffs are much more physical. And I think a guy like Trae Young will have some difficulties adjusting to that new playoff atmosphere. And then, factoring in another guy like Lou Williams, who's expected to be that sixth man for the Atlanta Hawks.
Do you mean Lemon Pepper Lou again?
Lemon Pepper Lou. And, he's had his fair share of struggles in the NBA playoffs as well. And then another guy like Bogdanovich, who despite being great for them, hasn't the playoff experience either. So this will be his first time being in the playoffs. New York, again, though, has a top 5 defense for a reason. And they're going to try to make life tough for the Atlanta Hawks. Their schemes are great. Their coaching on the defensive side of the ball is great, despite the fact that they don't really have any quote-unquote great defenders. But the fact that they still have a top 5 defense, despite not having any talented defenders, you could say, signifies what Tom Thibodeau has been for them. And that brings me to my final point, where Tom Thibodeau's experience, I think, will come into play, especially in the playoffs against a guy like Nate McMillan. Tom Thibodeau has had much more success in the playoffs than Nate McMillan has. Nate McMillan is notoriously very, I think, average or median in the playoffs and with his teams. Whereas Tom Thibodeau has gotten his teams to the conference finals. And, going back to the Chicago days, was challenging the Miami Heat for Eastern Conference supremacy. And that's the thing, right? Tom Thibodeau and his experience and the fact that defense wins playoff games. And New York has a much better defense than the Atlanta Hawks do. And the New York Knicks, I think, will be very aggressive with their Tom Thibodeau-like defense.
Yeah, man. Listen, this is probably gonna be it's gonna be the least watched series, I think. Although, despite it being probably one of the most competitive ones, just based on the fact that they're pretty evenly matched teams. Like, again, they're polar opposites of each other. But again, like, each team has their pros and cons. I mean, like you mentioned with New York, they have their capable scorers of Julius Randle, RJ Barrett, Derrick Rose, etc., etc. But Atlanta's got their scorers as well. I mean, you're talking about a guy in Trae Young who will get you about 30. You're getting a Bogdanovich and Lou Williams potentially coming off your bench, which is huge. Like, even if we get Lemon Pepper Lou, we might still get like 15 or 18 a night from Bogdan. Like, that's still something. And then Capella's going to grab every single rebound. He's going to be a presence. Okongwu has been, coming along, as of late. They still have freaking the GOAT Tony Snell and Solomon Hill. So
hey, Tony Snell hasn't missed a free throw in 2 years.
Tony Snell and Solomon Hill, they have the legendary Raptor killers. Yeah. Just saying. But Atlanta has their talent too. Now again, they're not great defensively. Like I've been so critical of Trae Young and his defense just because again, like he can't do it. Like he's got like the Isaiah Thomas effect where it just no matter what he does, he's just too small, man. And I think New York is gonna put him in the pick and roll, try to get him switched on to a guy like Julius Randle or something and cook him. But here's my thing about the New York Knicks.
Here we go.
They're very reliant on Julius Randle in the sense that Julius Randle is their creator. Like you mentioned guys like RJ Barrett, Derrick Rose. Are they really creators on your team? They can maybe find their own offense, but what is RJ going to do when he's doubled? I think he's capable of maybe sometimes burning the defense, but I don't see that being a consistent thing throughout a playoff series. Then the same thing with Derrick Rose. Even Burks and Quickly. Like these other guys that can really take over. Julius Randle is their guy, and the team I think follows through his energy. So if he's shut down, I think you can realistically shut down the New York Knicks offense because again, they're 23rd for a reason. Like besides Julius Randle, they really don't have a ton of offense on that team. And I think again, Atlanta might not have the defensive ability, but I could see them throwing a Congo. I can see them throwing bodies in at Randle and forcing him to play on the perimeter. Again, Randle shot really great from 3 this year. He's been awesome from 3. But man, I think his preference is obviously to go inside and to be a big man. So I think Atlanta's going to take that away, and I think that will collapse New York's offense. But again, will Atlanta have enough offensive firepower to overcome New York's defense? That's to me the big question. And then the other question marks on guys like DeAndre Hunter. I don't know if he's playing or not. We don't.
Yeah, situation kind of murky. I think.
Not 100% sure on DeAndre Hunter. If he's playing again, that's another guy you can throw on a guy like RJ.
Yeah, but he's missed so much time. I don't.
Hey, listen, man, he's still a great perimeter defender.
Yeah, but I don't even know how much he's gonna play. To be honest.
Yeah, I don't know how much he's gonna play. Like, it all depends on his health, man. And again, you talk about Thibodeau's experience versus Nathan Millen's, but you're also talking about two coaches that are very stuck in their ways and not really adjustable coaches. Like both sides, like Tibbs doesn't like changing his ways. Neither does Nate McMillan. So it's really about who blinks first.
Pretty much,
That's what it comes down to. But yeah, I mean, as much as you say defense wins the playoff game, I think this is gonna be a competitive series. I think it could actually be a little bit of fun. But I have equal hatred on both sides. But I think I gotta keep my theme consistent, man. I gotta keep my bandwagon hate going on the New York Knicks, and that's why I'm picking the Atlanta Hawks in 7 games.
Oh my god, man. Listen, to your point about if Atlanta is able to shut down Julius Randle, New York's offense is, bad enough in theory that Atlanta Hawks could do some damage to New York's offense. However, my thing is, once again, New York doesn't rely on their offense to win them games. They rely on their defense to win them games. And in the playoffs, with more physicality and the offense, offensive numbers all go down across the board in the playoffs, which is why defense is so much more important. It's so much harder to come by baskets in the playoffs. And so the New York Knicks, I think, are much more suited towards the playoff basketball atmosphere than the Atlanta Hawks are. And for that reason, again, I think they're both pretty evenly matched teams, but for that reason, I am actually going to go with the New York Knicks winning it in 7 games for the series.
Listen, honestly, it's a toss-up between which one of these teams are going to win. I think, the sensible part of me is saying New York, but you know what? Just to keep consistent, I'm gonna go with Atlanta. Just because, and again, whichever one of these teams makes it to the second round, they're gonna be slapped. Spoiler alert! My second round prediction: which one of these teams are gonna be slapped in the next round. Like that's just gonna happen. Like there's just no denying it. But yeah, those are our predictions for the first round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. Let us know what you guys think. And just to quickly recap them, we have Philadelphia advancing in a sweep, Brooklyn beating Boston in 5 games. We have Milwaukee beating Miami in 7, and Zeeshan has New York winning in 7. I have Atlanta winning in 7. So those are our predictions. Let us know what you guys think, agree or disagree, on the comment section on YouTube or on social media. And finally, to bring us into the Up and Under segment for this week, not really a ton of news, honestly, with playoffs going on. But first off, we got to talk about the NBA play-in tournament. Obviously, it was a little interesting. It was interesting, obviously, but again, it looks more likely than not that the 7th and 8th seeds who went into the play-ins are going to be the 7 and 8 seeds for the playoffs, which kind of, raises question on how good was it? Because again, the best game we saw was the Warriors versus Lakers. That was the best game hands down we saw. But I don't think every single year you're gonna have a LeBron James versus Steph Curry in the play-in, which is why we gotta ask Adam Silver. Is basically saying he wants the play-in tournament to be permanent. So you up or under on what Adam Silver mentioned about the NBA play-in tournament?
I mean, I'm under on it. We've said this before that we're not fans of the play-in tournament. And going off of your points, first of all, the teams that were supposed to make it made it, right? The 7 and 8 seeds.
So what was the point?
Exactly. The teams that were supposed to make it. Well, I mean, we're still waiting for the Golden State Memphis team, but I think we can all. I would say Golden State might win it.
Most likely,
will probably win it, to be honest. Unless Memphis is a good team, no doubt. So they definitely could.
Shout out John Morant.
Shout out Memphis. Shout out JV. JV being great. But for the most part, the teams that were supposed to make it made it. Then we're talking about when the success in terms of entertainment value for the play-in tournament. If we're being real, there was only one really good game.
Yeah.
And we're saying it was a Golden State.
Wasn't there like 2 other blowouts?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And it was like blowouts across the board. San Antonio versus Memphis, I think, finished as a very good game.
Well, I mean,
however,
it was down like 22.
Yeah, but again, it's San Antonio versus Memphis. Like, let's be real.
Yeah.
Right? The only good game, definitively, was the Golden State versus the Los Angeles Lakers game. And to your point, that only happened because of the fact that the Golden State Warriors are missing Klay Thompson this year, and then LeBron James and Anthony Davis and the whole Lakers team were injured to hell this year, and so they dropped down to the 7th seed. Which other year would you see a LeBron James versus Steph Curry matchup in the play-in tournament? Never, right? So when this is the highest or like the most potential you could get out of a play-in tournament, but chances are this is never going to happen again. Right, so when we're talking about the success in terms of entertainment value for the play-in tournament, I don't really see the entertainment value except for the one game that we had, honestly.
The one game I watched.
Exactly. So the rest of the games, I honestly couldn't care less. And also the fact that you're watching the 7th versus 8th versus 9th versus 10th seed. We know for the most part, whoever wins those games are going to get slapped in the first round by the first or second seed. Let's be real. Except for, again, the Los Angeles Lakers this year or the Golden State Warriors, right? Both teams that were heavily affected by the COVID and injury experience of this season. However, going forward, will those things happen again? Hopefully not, because we don't want any of this to happen again. Yeah. But in terms of the entertainment value of the play-in tournament, I don't really see it.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you, man. I just don't see the need for this. It comes back to my whole point when I mentioned a couple of episodes when we talked about the play-in tournament was that what's the incentive for the 7th and 8th seed to do this? They already earned their spot to be in the playoffs. They won more games than the 9th and 10th seeds. Why do they have to compete for it? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And this basically proves it. The fact that the 7th and 8th seed in the Eastern Conference and pretty much the 7th and most likely the 8th seed in the Western Conference are going to make the playoffs. What was the point of playing these 2 extra games that put so much pressure and risking injury? Imagine LeBron got hurt on that which was a flagrant foul, by the way, on Draymond Green. That was a flagrant foul by Draymond Green. But imagine LeBron got injured and the Lakers lost. The Lakers would have been like, what the hell? We were the 7th seed. We should have been in the playoffs. But now my best player got hurt. I think that just, it doesn't work, It's one of those, situations where, you would hate to see that happen. You would hate to see a situation like that happen. And I think that's kind of what the play-in tournaments. I don't think it should stick around.
Yeah, man. I think we've said before that we're not fans of this play-in tournament. A lot of fans, I think, are, and that's probably going to be the main incentive going forward for the NBA.
And this.
Yeah, exactly. And this. That's the main incentive.
I mean, the green light. They got it.
Yeah, exactly. But in terms of entertainment value, I don't really see it with the play-in tournament. But moving on, are you up or under on the fact that Masai Ujiri, the Raptors president, saying that the Raptors have no interest in playing outside of Toronto again?
Yeah, I'm up on that. this season, like again, they meant all the players and coaches and in their interviews all mentioned Tampa was great as being like a location, having the weather, all that stuff. But it's not Toronto. Like that's the underlying. It's not where they're supposed to be. It's not where they're supposed to be playing. It's not home. It's not a home atmosphere for them because that's not where the team's supposed to be. So I think it was a huge disadvantage for the Raptors in general. Now, again, I know the circumstances made it so that they had no choice but to go to Tampa, but it was not an advantageous situation for the Toronto Raptors. And I think any team who would have been put into that situation would have probably had the same experience because, especially as a player, like you have a routine when you're at home. You know what you're doing. You know where everything is. But when you're taken away from that, have to establish a whole new routine, and then get to your peak and then get hit with COVID and then deal with up and down. Like, it was just an entirely bad situation to start to finish from the Raptors.
Yeah, like when we're talking about they had 72 away games, legitimately. When they were at home, they were getting booed by their own home crowd, right? So it wasn't advantageous for them. And then not to mention the fact that like a lot of these guys have families, right?
Yeah.
And like if you move your whole family to Toronto and then you're forced to move, at least because I don't think they would take their whole family with them. They would probably only take like their immediate family to their new location. Having to approve your whole family, not to mention if like your kids are going to school. I know everything is like online this year, so it's not as bad. But like your kids are going to school, for example, your wife or whatever has a job. Like it's a whole challenge trying to do this while your job is pretty much based on your routine, as Hani said. So I think this was just not a good experience for the Toronto Raptors. The Toronto Raptors are still on their playoff streak. The Tampa Bay Raptors are the ones who got kicked out of the playoffs this year.
Tampa had bad basketball. And also the other thing that when you look up in the Raptors, man, and you just don't see anything familiar anymore. Like I know the Raptors got their championship banner with them, but like you look up, you don't see anything Toronto. You just see everything Tampa. So
yeah,
that it's all about the mental aspect to it as well. But moving on, all you want on Victor Oladipo is set to miss the rest of the season with after he's going to undergo quad surgery. Now, again, Victor Oladipo has been battling this quad injury for the last 2 years now, and he was traded by Miami, but now he's going to be an impending free agent and now undergoing surgery. So, are you up on how this impacts the Miami Heat and Victor Oladipo?
I mean, I'm obviously under on it for both sides because of the fact that Victor Oladipo, for one, is trying to get as much money as he can in free agency, and now he's probably going to have to take some DeMarcus Cousins deals, right?
Yeah.
Right? Nobody's gonna give him any good contracts for a player of his caliber. So he's gonna have to take a lot of prove-it deals. So for him, this was just not a good situation for him, especially given the fact that he was going to, I think, an ideal situation in Miami for himself and for where he'd be playing at, his role, everything. And for him, this injury is not ideal. And then we already talked about the Miami, like the issue of Victor Oladipo being injured for Miami. This just kills them even more in the sense their depth is, they have less depth, they have less offense, they have less defense, they lose a ball creator, another facilitator, another guy that can take off pressure off of Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. So I think this just hurts them a lot, given the fact that they traded away a guy like Kelly Olynyk, who we've seen what he's doing in Houston. Now, again, I don't think he would have done that in Miami, but it would definitely be nice to have at least some of that replicated in a Miami Heat jersey. So giving up giving up Kelly Olynyk for a guy like Victor Oladipo, who you're going to miss now in the playoffs, is not ideal. I think the only good thing that comes out of this is for the Miami Heat that they gave up Kelly Olynyk, who's going to be impending free agent, for a guy like Victor Oladipo, who's also an impending free agent. So they have no contractual obligations towards either of those guys. It frees up some money. And now if they want to re-sign Victor Oladipo, for example, I mean, for them, they can re-sign him at a cheaper price.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's probably the only positive. But again, in terms of a guy like Victor Oladipo, like, that's something. Like, you brought up DeMarcus Cousins. That's actually the perfect analogy, the perfect comparison in the sense that DeMarcus Cousins had a career year with the New Orleans Pelicans before he got hurt. He got hurt and never really recovered. And after that, just taking 1 year deal after 1 year deal, hopping from place to another, and it looks like that might happen to Victor Oladipo. Now, again, we're talking about a big versus a guard, and completely different injuries. Like Victor Oladipo was a quad, DeMarcus Cousins was Achilles, so it's a little different. But again, the concept is the same. I mean, a player who was great 2 years ago before he got hurt gets hurt and now isn't the same again. We've seen it time and time again, man. It sucks. It's a really shitty narrative, but again, it's kind of just part of sports, man. It's just part of it all.
Yeah, and finally, oh man, are you over under on the fact that Luke Walton will reportedly return as the Kings head coach next season?
Dude, I'm under on this, man. Our hit list backfired. Like, how did it backfire? Like, we basically were like, Luke Walton's trash. He sucks. Like, he's not really a great coach. And the Kings are like, we're going to bring you back. Like, it's such a Sacramento Kings thing to do, man. Like, it's honestly such a Vivek Ranadive move. By the way, we don't even know who their GM is. Like, we thought it was Roddy, but it's actually not their GM. So I don't even know who's running the Kings organization at this point. But this ain't the move, man. This is legitimately one of those moves where you're just like...
Monty McNair.
Monty McNair.
That's who it was.
So, who?
I mean, I've heard he has a good reputation around the league. So
bro, he's bringing back Luke Walton, bro.
I mean, that might be an order from upstairs, though. But yeah, man, like Luke Walton, I don't understand how this guy is going to have his job, man. Like, how silly. Scott Brooks, bro, my list backfired. Like, I got like 50% on my list. Scott Brooks is probably going to be back next year. Luke Walton is going to be back. I do think Luke Walton might be canned in the middle of the season next year.
Who knows?
But I wouldn't be surprised. And why is that? Because it's a perpetual disappointment that is the Sacramento Kings franchise.
Yep.
And Kings fans have no problem with me saying that because they're stuck in sports purgatory as well. They know better than I do, to be honest.
Dude, they have the longest active playoff drought, I think.
I think in North American sports or something.
Dude, right? Remember when Minnesota had the longest drought?
Yeah.
So the fact that you were the second longest drought and now you...
And the fact that at least Minnesota had, some semblance of talent on their team, and then they got Jimmy Butler, so they had some hope, and they got a good, quote-unquote, good coach in Tom Thibodeau. Sacramento has literally no hope. Do you see them getting an 8th seed next year with the team? No.
Maybe if the play-in spot opens up, but again, it's like, there's just so much talent in the Western Conference that, like, a team like Golden State struggled to get the 8th spot. Like, it's not easy in the Western Conference, and I don't see the Kings doing much of anything.
How does Deuce still have a job? I don't. This is why bad franchises remain bad franchises, pretty much.
Yeah, man. I don't know what to say, man. I'm under on the Luke Walton thing, but we'll see what happens, man. The Kings are just a garbage franchise. But with that concludes this week's episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Definitely subscribe to the show on all the podcast platforms. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, YouTube, basically wherever you can find a podcast, you can find us with the Upletter Podcast. Also, check us out on social media, Twitter and Instagram at UpletterN_podcast, Facebook.com/UpletterPodcast for all the latest updates whenever we post a new episode or a reaction to news, like playoffs, for instance, as they occur. So definitely check that out. Also, check out our website, UpletterPodcast.com. It's a central hub for the show. It's a place where we write blog posts with every single episode, so if you don't have time to listen or watch the whole thing, you can read about it on our website. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so, man. And yeah, man, it's playoff time.
Yeah, stay tuned for our Western Conference predictions as well. Our all-NBA, all-defensive teams also going to come out very, very soon.
And then off-season content as well. So definitely stay tuned. We have a lot coming on the show. So with that concludes this week's episode. We'll see you guys all next one. Take it easy.
Easy.